Welcome to anyone who has joined so far. It's just the top of the hour. We're going to give it a few minutes to see who else is going to be here tonight, and then we'll get officially going. But thank you for being here. Well, I think we're going to begin. I'm sure others will be joining us, and we'll be led into tonight's event as they get here. As I said in the chat, thanks everyone for making the time to be here tonight. I think we're going to have a pretty interesting, robust conversation. We got some great people here that will be hopefully delving into things that some of you may not be as familiar with, some things you may be, and overall just to kind of build some good energy out there in all of our communities on making good change. Tonight's topic, or title for tonight's topic, was Community Resilience in the Midst of Chaos. I'm just going to read a couple things from the promotion piece for the event, and then we're going to kind of dive into some, I think, some really good conversation here. So we frame this as much as humans have effectively organized to harm and destroy their land bases and each other, the innate drive to come together in community to help each other in times of extreme events is an even more powerful force. Disasters and crisis moments are a part of life, but they're also on the rise, along with the fact that the system itself has proven in many instances to fail to address community needs. There's a growing recognition that it'll be up to us, the people of our communities, to not only be ready for those moments of high need, but to organize and move into action every day because of the multitude of dire needs caused by or not being addressed by the system. So that's kind of our starting point for tonight's journey. My name is Kai Hushka. I'm part of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And joining me tonight, we have Denzel Caldwell, Lisa Lake, and Chad Nicholson. I'm going to let them kind of introduce themselves and sort of their backgrounds and backstories as we kind of delve into a lot of different topics around this idea of community resilience. And I thought to kind of get us going, and I would love for each of you to come at this from your own experiences, your own perspectives, your own observations, your own knowledge, but to kind of start with the question of, what does community resilience even look like to you, or what does it look like in the realm of the work that you're involved in? So maybe describing it based on what you're immersed in can give people a sense of how multifaceted the idea of community resilience really is and why it needs to be that way. I guess with that, Lisa, would you mind kind of just getting the conversation going here, and we'll let Denzel and Chad kind of join you from there.
Be happy to. I'm Lisa Lake, Executive Director of Advocacy 5, a nonprofit for the houseless in Portland, Oregon. Also a member of EWOCS as a trained medic. We're in the midst of the BLM protest in Portland. And then we also have done lots of other community work, recently working on housing with hosts in communities, basically just people who live next door, stepping up and taking in houseless people and keeping them for a certain amount of time, and just rising to the occasion, I guess. So in my community with that, what everything looks like is just asking. And you keep asking. And at first we went to the city officials to ask for the things we needed, like land to set up houseless communities, for help during winter gear drives. And the city did some of that, but then did a lot of taking back of that once they saw the explosion of houseless on the streets. Kind of became known that it just wasn't wanted and it was detracting from visitors in the city. And it's a crisis and you can't ignore it. And even a city can't ignore it or sweep it away. So we are just digging deep into our community and finding out who can host people who have fallen onto the streets, get them out, and also just keep working on everything, advocacy and activism in every way. That's how we're doing it.
Awesome. Denzel, Chad, like what have you guys, that question of how would you describe sort of community resilience based on your experiences? Denzel.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Denzel. I am the electoral justice researcher and educator at Highlander Center. I am also an organizer with the Black Nashville Assembly, which is a Black grassroots participatory democracy project where we're trying to build a self-determined Black working class in the city of Nashville that is self-governing. I would define community resilience as the practice of maintaining a community's dignity in the face of dehumanization. So when I think of that in the context of our work, the work that we're doing comes from a long tradition of the Black liberation movement. Nashville, for those who don't know, is the center or the starting ground zero for the reparations movement for the formerly enslaved. We have a long history of organizing and activism that includes the sit-in movements during the Nashville sit-ins. And so part of our work falls under in alignment with the work that's being done in the city in the midst of hyper-gentrification, in the midst of corporate land takeover in the city. What we're doing with our project is we're getting Black folks who are part of the working class here in Nashville to center our needs in a way that is not influenced by corporate entities. It's not influenced by their political puppets, but it's influenced directly by our needs. But not just in a way to where we're just participating in an electoral structure, but also in a way where we're learning how to govern ourselves, how to engage in world building and future making. And so a lot of that has been, building relationship with community, figuring out what community wants, and then also leading and facilitating with community on how we actually make those things happen. And so, part of that right now this year looks like one of our folks deciding to run for an office, but doing so from the perspective of this is one of many pieces of our work as we try to build a self-determined community that is irrespective of the electoral process and the limitations that come with that.
Thanks, Denzel and Lisa. Chad Nicholson, I'm with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Have been doing this work since 2009, from Washington State to California to Maine, and now I live outside Pittsburgh in a small municipality where I also recently, I'm somewhat reluctant to admit it, became an elected official on local council because I felt that's where at least where I live, I had the ability to make the most impact, particularly around environmental issues and public safety issues. Resilience to me, I think it can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And I originally got my start in organizing after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And I had a very different view of the world back then in terms of how I thought things worked. And essentially what I learned down there was that a lot of the aid and the assistance that we or that I expected to make it to the folks that were most in need down there didn't end up making it there. And that most of the folks that were on the ground there ended up coming together to rebuild their own homes, rebuild their own schools and communities in ways independent of any sorts of official government or institutional or corporate aid. And so since that time, I've seen that in a lot of the other organizing I've done around the country. And most recently, this is something maybe worth getting into a little bit later this evening, a community called Grant Township that I've worked with for almost 10 years at this point, a small community, rural Pennsylvania, about 700 people that's been fighting off a frac waste injection well for the last 10 years, recently got a win. And the win is that they're not going to have an injection well. And the resistance has taken many, many forms of what I would describe as resilience, and that it wasn't just one single strategy or thing that they used or utilized to get what was ultimately important to them. They worked through the courts, they worked through the legal system, they did direct action, they did protests, they passed laws in direct defiance of state and federal laws, and they continued over time to just educate and organize and lean on each other, knowing that the system was set up to stomp on them and that they refused to accept what was their fate according to the system. And that over, a period of time and a variety of tactics and techniques, they eventually ended up winning. And so, the next steps are going to be, what does that look like in the future, not just for that community, but how can other communities, learn from their resilience and recognize there's not a single answer for any of us, and how we both resist what's harmful to our communities and also begin building towards better futures.
Yeah, you all kind of touched upon it in your own way. I'm just curious to maybe pull on that a little bit more. This idea of the kind of resiliency piece and the way you each described it and your experiences, has that element of kind of the resistant sort of a bit of sort of the disobedience, but justified disobedience, not just to be disobedient for disobedience sake. Like, what other ingredients are there that you guys have seen or been a part of? Like, how do things really build in the sense of really advocating for one's community, especially when you're attempting to do it sort of outside the structure or very often against the structure itself that's created the situation? I mean, what are some of those other components that you found community members possess that make them effective, both as resistors, but also kind of building the possibility for a different reality in that sort of resilience frame? Feel free to just jump in.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in on that. I think some of the elements also include reframing how we look at this type of work that we're doing. Oftentimes there's a tendency for a small group of us to see ourselves as enlightened ones that are trying to lead their community into something a lot more revolutionary. And the reality is that people know what they need. Community members know what they need. We see it in times of crisis. We don't have to look any further than COVID. What happened in COVID? People chose to help each other without bureaucratic red tape, without any sort of middle person. People decided to help each other. And so, part of the work that I think, or elements that come with this, is recognizing that community already has that capacity to engage in world building. And so, a lot of the things that we do, whether it's governance work, whether it's mutual aid work, has to come from that, right? Because we have to believe in people's capacity to build a new world, a better world that is need-based, or based on the things that we know that it's quality of life.
Yeah, just to let everyone know, Denzel never sleeps, so he's actually doing community resilience work as we're talking about community resilience. So forgive some of his background noise as he's trying to move from place to place and be here tonight. So we really appreciate Denzel making the time.
I love it. Brings an aura of authenticity to the webinar. I think I'll jump in. Most of the time that I'm working with the houseless, I find such surprising things about them. Most of the time, the community that's most affected or has been affected by a disaster or falling through the system or the system not working at all, they have the tools. They just need the safety net to actually get down to this work. We have doctors and lawyers and nurses and everybody living on the streets at this point. It doesn't affect just people, of a poverty standard or a certain ethnicity. It is all over. And, we started delving into that and doing kind of personal one-on-one work and kind of categorizing people in different sections. What do you have? What can you bring to the table? And then getting them to go in front of the powers that be to plead their case. So it's not just a caseworker up there spouting some statistics. It's actually a person, with this living experience saying, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's happening in your own community. This is what happened to me. How can we start, resilience against this or stop the powers that be that are pushing against us to have adequate housing, safe housing, affordable housing. So we just kind of collected people and then we, excited them and supported them in doing their own work. And we have found that that's been the most effective. And that's kind of how it started with a lot of our programs, whether it's, medics on the street, training people to be in times of conflicts, to be people who guard and support the people who are being most affected, the BLM movement, we were the front line. Then moving over to pivoting to the wildfires that ran through Oregon, where we set up an entire community for the better part of 2 weeks, which had people could come through and get food, they could get clothing, they could get school supplies for their kids, they could get everything in this one-stop shopping. And to talk about, kind of ask permission first, or don't ask permission first. We kind of took over a multi-cineplex parking lot and set this up. And a couple of days into it, somebody showed up, saying, hey, this is our property. What are you doing here? So we explained to them, and then I took them on a tour of what we were doing. And they were so excited that this unused property was, at first they were ready to say, hey, get off of here. We don't have the insurance to do this. Then they became very excited about the project and actually called the owners of the land. This was a property manager. And the owners of the land ended up donating thousands of dollars to us to keep this up. They gave us a time limit, which was fair. But that's what I mean by sometimes just taking the moment, seizing the moment, and creating your own infrastructure, even if it's just for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, can translate into a lot.
No, I'm glad you got to that point, Lisa, and the sort of permission idea, and just that level of confidence it takes to say we're doing good here, and if that means we do things that seem to be outside the ordinary or outside the system, well, so be it. It's required, and I feel like that's a thread that runs through all of your guys' experience, especially as we talked last week in preparation for tonight. That idea of permission. What is it? How do people arrive at that point of realizing that they don't need permission or they themselves can take care of it? And so I think that's the interesting piece of all your different stories of community resilience work that you've been talking about so far here tonight and that we touched on last week.
Yeah, and I think along that thread, Kai, I think if we knew what people were able to reach deep down and find that, we would be in a very different place. And a lot of times it's surprising to me. There's not a formula. People have been talking about this for centuries about how do we find the people to flip the switches in our communities. And I don't think that's anything that, I'm not willing to try to answer that, because I have been surprised at many, many turns and many different directions. I've worked with a lot of rural communities over the past, 5-6 years, and also with some more affluent suburban communities. And I have not found a common thread that runs through the type of person or the type of group that ultimately is willing to really dig deep and be willing to go outside the system when the shit hits the fan. And I mean, what I think does bring, what I have seen is folks that are really committed to what it is that they, number one, don't want to see happen in their community or to the people that they love and care about. And number two, who are willing to hold on to that commitment, but also change their mind as they see tactics or strategies that they're pursuing fail. And not let that be the take my ball and go home strategy, but like, okay, let's learn from that. How do we continue on? And then that's the resilience piece. And, there's been, I would say, more affluent communities that have folded in the face of resistance, and a lot of communities that are underserved that have really, shown a lot more resilience and a lot more strategy and thinking than this is my own, privilege and, just ignorance sometimes, but I guess I've just not found something that really is a throughway there. And that is, for me, the essence of the organizing and in finding the resilience is the folks that are not willing to take no for an answer when they're told by the system or the structure that they don't have the authority to do what it is that they know is right for their community. So it's simply, like looking for that rebellious streak or that resilient streak that says, no, if you're telling me that I can't do what we know is right for our community, I'm not willing to accept that. And I'm willing to continue pursuing and creating different tactics and strategies to get what we actually need moving forward, even if that means moving outside the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna, all three of you already touched upon that, sort of that, you don't need permission, you are capable, that confidence piece. But I'm curious, how difficult or maybe easy has it been for people to sort of stay in that realm of maintaining that idea of that we can do it, knowing how powerful the system is to sort of bring you back in the fold. You're going to work with the city of Portland, and they have a certain objective that often can be counter to what you're trying to do around basically trying to give people shelter and get them back on their feet, or any of the work that each of you guys have been doing. Like, how do communities that you see sort of stay strong in the face of the fact that the system is pretty powerful, both either in its intentional means of creating the catastrophic situations, and or just isn't designed to deal with it in the way that we thought it was? Like, how does that look like, or how does that look like currently, even for all of you and with what you're involved in?
I think that with us, it's we have a great deal of self-care that we teach everybody that works with us, and try to get them to understand the importance of that. And we also have a tap out method, from whoever, whether you're working on the inside or you're hosting a houseless member of the community, or the houseless member of community is going through a crisis. We have a method where you can say, I need a break. Now we also live in a city that's full of potential in this area, right? We're a city of organizers and rabble rousers, as to use an old timey term. So there are a lot of people there doing this kind of work, and they're very able to pivot to whatever we need them to pivot to. But then there are long stretches of time where nobody seems to be, in for anything, because it's been a lot, and we all kind of need to just take it down. Keep the food coming and the housing shelter coming, and making sure everybody's safe, and medically taken care of, but then basically just stay in status quo mode until the next movement can build up and we can push a little further. It's always about, just for me, pushing, the needle a little bit more. We found that, huge, big encounters often lead to a lot of punishment, for lack of a better word, from the city. So we've learned to just kind of to not necessarily attack, but mold and shape and change attitudes more than get really feisty. I mean, we're still stealing land and setting up camps, but that's, like you said, that's a necessity, especially in this day and age. And whether we're allowed to be there for a month or 6 weeks, that's X amount of people that we could connect to social services or get on organ health plans, or, you know, start them in some way towards stability?
Yeah, I would. So one of the things that we say about our work with the Black National Assembly is that it's a political home for those who can vote, can't vote, or have nothing to vote for. Right, and so part of us framing our work that way is recognizing that there are moments, particularly during electoral cycles, where people are hypercharged to do a certain thing, participate in the electoral cycles, and be done with thinking around our daily issues, right? And so part of the work that we're doing to resist that, what I like to call the hype moment, is constant engagement. So part of the work that we do repetitively monthly, we have things like mass meetings where we're centering some of the needs that are in our city to get people to talk through what is happening in the city. Right? And while we're doing it, we're building relationships with people in our community. But we're doing it in a way we have these conversations that are explicitly politicized. Like, so we're naming who is doing what, but we're also trying to center our needs, our collective needs, as opposed to trying to fit an external agenda. We also have our assemblies where we're developing our own community agendas, political agendas, right? And that's irrespective of electoral cycles, whether it's candidates are running or not. These are the things that we know we need and we need to act upon. So that is a consistent thing that's working on monthly. We also have moments where when we do talk about the electoral structure, we're looking at city council. They're making decisions around our lives daily. And so instead of it being a matter of paying attention to their campaign runs and things like that, no, let's create a space where we're having dinner with our people, feeding our people. And we're talking about the decisions that they're making and ways in which we can not only intervene through that structure, but also address those structures when we're not in an electoral cycle. And so I say all that to say one of the ways that we try to resist the resiliency of the system is to constantly engage our people with our daily needs and putting them in a political context so that we have moments where, for example, our mayor, when we demand for participatory budgeting, our mayor creating some miniature participatory budget project in a corner of the city with a drop of the bucket of budget, our people can see this is not a win. This is the system doing what it does, placating our demands, co-opting and refusing to work for us because it never did. And so those are just some of the ways that we're doing it. I'm actually very excited because this is going to, with us being a 2-year project, I'm very excited about some of the possibilities that we'll have as we're starting to engage people consistently and help them to see how exactly this current structure will never work for us, especially as Black working class people nationally.
Yeah, I think last week, Denzel, you framed it as sort of breaking the conditioning so that as people become more immersed and sort of see it and watch it, you know, systemically fail, you know, in real time, that becomes part of that resilience resistance build out. You know, that was really interesting when, yeah, again, when we talked last week about how you're interfacing with the kind of typical electoral world in a very different way. And I think that is something all of us experience in our community work, just that level and depth of conditioning of how much hold the system really has. Yeah, and I also wonder in each of your work, like, you know, how much like things like trust factors in, or, you know, how important is it to have some level of collective values, or how have you dealt with communities of which maybe the values have sort of ran the spectrum, yet, you know, they've found ways to come together to help one another in sort of moments of either acute crisis or sort of the longer term slog of work that it's going to take to address some of these systemic problems.
Yeah, I think I was kind of going to get that from the previous question as well. I mean, a lot of the organizing that I've seen be successful over time is through, I hate to say it, it's retail organizing. It's one-to-one contacts, and doing the hard work of a relationship building, not only within the group, but also reaching out over time. I mean, I can usually tell pretty quickly if a group is going to want to organize or not by whether or not they're willing to get out and knock on doors and talk to their neighbors. And if they only want to be righteous about what they think the problem is, or, you know, what kind of a system they want to impose, essentially like basically keep the system top down, just, you know, just imbue it with new values. It's a pretty clear indication to me pretty quickly that, you know, there's not actually real grassroots organizing on the ground or resilience capability. And so it is the knocking on the doors. And frankly, I mean, a lot of that comes together too, like anything that I've seen be successful at food as a central value of organizing, community building, hosting events, transparency, developing their own media, essentially, getting things out, really being, you know, not if they're going to do an action or, you know, something where there might be arrests or things like that, but for the most part, really inviting in feedback, even though they know that that could come with increased scrutiny, increased criticism, that they're not scared of that, that they're really modeling what kind of a community they want to see for the future, and that people should be involved in participatory decisions within their community, and not shying away from that, not trying to hide everything, and going out and just educating folks. And I think the other big piece that I notice a lot is through the training and education that folks do. And this is something that, you know, we do with communities at CELDF, but other communities I've worked with that I don't have direct relationships with, is setting people up to be in their own power and recognizing that there is a wide spectrum of where people feel comfortable within resistance movements and within organizing. They come in at different times. And, you know, that a lot of the important organizing is being able to welcome people into those things and provide opportunities for them to step in at first. Maybe it's just giving a public comment at a meeting. Maybe later on it's organizing people in a street protest. You know, maybe later on it's developing a new law that is about, you know, resisting the existing legal system. Or talking, you know, some of the recent communities we've been talking with, what does a community justice system look like, where it's not reliant on the existing courts, but it's made up of people from the community on a restorative justice framework. You know, so having those types of conversations with folks, but I think a lot of it too is meeting people where they're at, continuing to shepherd and bring people in, and making sure you're not putting people in uncomfortable positions as well, where they might get nervous or they might get yelled at or something and they go away because they didn't have the resilience yet built up. And I think that's a major part of resilience organizing, is having that spectrum of people involved and being able to meet people where they're at and continue to guide them through a process over time. Because it's not going to happen if you just say you need to do this and this and this. People often don't feel like they have the skills, and then that courage that people need can, you know, go away like that.
I agree with that. Workshops and trainings, we do a lot of that. And I think it's a very powerful tool for a community to build up its own resilience and find, you're right, find their spot, you know, where they're best positioned, or where their knowledge, you know, is most acceptable and most accessible. And they can get in there and do the work they need to do, and maybe build up a bigger, you know, source of resiliency for themselves, and acting in their community with that.
How do you guys see what you're involved in? And maybe that's already sort of integrated into what you're doing, but, you know, obviously there's no shortage of immediate, emergent, acute, you know, long-term issues happening in communities that are, you know, outcomes really of a faulty system. So we're sort of treating, and somewhat to some levels, the symptoms, trying to get to the root problem often. But like, how when you're working with groups, or what have you witnessed that sort of blends together the sort of immediate needs, but then is maybe that energy and that power to really like change things on a deeper level? Like, I know that it's not an easy thing to do because it's just so overwhelming where we sit, you know, civically, economically, environmentally, and so on, that we're just kind of dealing with, you know, I'm thinking about you, Lisa, just, I mean, people looking for a break, right? Needing some shelter, needing a little assistance. And then yet, how do you pivot from there into saying, well, how do we change the system that this doesn't happen in the way that it's happening, or to the volume that it's happening, or happening at all? Like, how do we get to that? What is that we want? What's that future look like? I'm kind of curious, like in the work or conversations, or how are each of you sort of working in that realm so that that community resistance isn't merely about trying to deal with the trauma, but it's really getting to that better place, either in the process or eventually getting there, that, we get beyond these kinds of things.
Yeah, I think we're at such a tenuous state right now with the political side of things that everybody's just so fried, and they're flailing to a certain degree, people on the street and people working within government trying to change that. We've been working with a lot of lawyers for the ACLU. We've been doing a lot of work with other people who have select spots within the community, whether it be because they have money, because they have real estate. And we're kind of bringing them into our fold as people who have a place, more of an authority with this current government in our city, where they can speak to the powers that be and say, hey, something's going to give, and it's not going to give in a good way. So that's kind of the track we're on now. How does the city of Portland, or any major city, want to poise themselves to be on the edge of breaking down, abolishing some systems that have not worked for a long time? In the specter of everybody that I work with, there are a lot of complete abolitionists. I tend to be one of them. But there's also people who understand the framework that they have to work within. And it behooves us to really listen to them, because sometimes they can get along a little further than we can when we just want to take a hammer and, smash everything. So I tend to need to listen to them and then say, okay, so here's what I want, and here's what everybody else wants in the abolitionist framework. How can we kind of get that to a place where we can start pushing our government and our city council and all of that toward accepting and understanding what is actually going on, not just within their world, but actually taking them. We have them out on the streets. We have them following our medic team. We have them in the encampments when we're doing feedings and foot washings and everything, to understand the level of care that we need to have in a community. It's not just about putting some food out. It is about understanding and connecting people to communities of their own, so that they can, again, build up their own resilience within that community, knowing that they're cared for, they're going to be fed on a regular basis, their encampments are not going to be torn down, which is a problem we're having now. There's a big hammer going down where a lot of the city council is about sweeping and just taking the encampments away and taking everything people own. So then we're scrambling to replace birth certificates and cards for healthcare and all of the above. So that's the biggest fight we have now. That kind of was a little during COVID, kind of stopped a little bit, and now the resurgence is back up to rid. So it's even more important for us to find alternate ways to house people and get them off the streets, or to stand with them on the streets in a collective movement.
Lisa, can I ask a quick follow-up on that? In terms of getting folks housed, it sounds like the work you're doing is, amazing and incredibly important. And I'm also curious, is there, thank you for that. Is there long-term stuff about what would alleviate that? I know whether it's policy, or do you see this as being completely outside the system moving ahead? I'm just curious, like what would an ideal 5-10 years look like, or is that not possible given the system that we currently have?
Well, I think we have to speak to, like Denzel was, to the rampant gentrification. That's something that the city has to get a grasp on. They have to understand that just because somebody can pay $600,000 for a house doesn't mean they should. And they're going to end up with a lot of houses where people have overinvested, that they can't hold on to that, especially as jobs, begin to wane, as they do in every season. We have a high, low unemployment, and then all of a sudden people are scrambling looking for jobs, especially with startup, which Portland is full of. But I think that for the most part, what we want to do is form in our resistance work, we counter with, hey, there's a hotel right here, or a motel that went out during COVID. What could the city reinvest in this? Or as a community, could we buy this and reinvest in it? So we're working on a few of those things. Hopefully we can kind of gather. But I really think this underground thing that we've got going on is our best chance of getting most people, the most people off the streets. There are community members who are willing, they just don't know how. So you have to empower them. You have to, give them training about how to be a host. When there's a difference in opinion with the person that you're hosting, how do you deal with that? Is there a person who's going to be there within an hour, or is there a group, which we have all kinds of, med groups. We also have crisis workers who are 24/7, who will go to a house and kind of, do that repair work. It's been most successful because we've been taking care of it. It's exhausting. It's long-term. It's going to be long-term, but at least those things are in place, along with us pushing against the city to get more momentum. I'm not a shelter fan, but those going up for temporary, respite for people getting off the streets and getting connected to social working seems to work for some people. And then we just keep building encampments and presenting, basically resisting tearing down of those encampments. So yeah, it's a long haul, and I don't know, until the money issue is solved with the gentrification, I don't know that we're ever going to see in the inner cities where we can, place people and have them safe for a long period of time, or have them be able to afford, anything. So.
Yeah, one thing I would add for the work that we're doing, two aspects come to mind. So we've done a couple of initiatives that were fulfilling the direct need. Like we've had shoe drives. We were able to get brand new shoes for kids who didn't have any newer clothes for the school year. But one of the things that I really want to lift up that we do is the cultural work to build our resilience. We have a lot of artists, musical artists especially, but our artists that we've organized into our work. And so part of what we're doing is we've created concerts, like grassroots concerts where we have folks who are from the area who politicize their music and really are shaping the culture. And we're putting them in places where we're able to not only have them perform context. We're having fun with our people. We have a thing called Recharge, where we're having in the midst of all of our campaign work, or and oftentimes, like, people will look at that and think, okay, that's important, but how is that fitting to large work? Well, part of it is like giving a glimpse of the type of community that we want to live in the future, right? A freer world, or a world where we have our needs met, it should be fun. And so a lot of that is shaped by just some of our cultural practices. So a lot of what we've been doing as well has also been encouraging the artists that have been a part of our work to use their skills and talent to continue to recharge people that are in the work, as we're continuously building people's muscles for community governance. So.
I love that idea. We do that with a bunch of growers who do plants. So we have like plant giveaway Fridays where people come and they, learn how to take care of a certain plant. They take it back to their encampment. The places are growing. They learn how to grow things. I really like that idea of keeping people alive with joy. So.
Yeah, last week we talked about money and funding, and how does that factor in, and the sort of the inclination that people say, well, we can't really do something because we can't really get the funding. And I think it was you, Lisa, that was talking about, well, you do it anyway, you find alternative means, and don't let that stop you. I think letting the viewers that are part of the here live, and those who may see the recording of this, like, what other arenas of that kind of things that sort of stop us that you guys think is important to speak to. You know, we've talked about confidence and permission, you know, and other things of those realms, and sort of building trust and relationships. Like, what else do you guys have you witnessed, or what else would you want to share for people to kind of understand about what is the dynamic nature of sort of community resilience in the realms you've been working in?
Want to speak to the funding part or?
Yeah, either way. I mean, it was more just kind of, you know, giving people a sense of, you know, yeah, funding could be one of those things. Like, how do you navigate that, and you know, how does that help, or how do people often maybe feel like, well, we can't get the funding, so you know, why bother, or get stuck in that idea of thinking of funding all the time.
Right, yeah, which we do. I get stuck in that a lot. But I think there's all kinds of alternative means, whereas if you needed to, you know, okay, just feed 100 people at a park. Working your way toward that can be daunting. That's a lot of money to put on the table. There are people there that will prepare the food, but how do you get the food? So we do a lot of one-on-one gleaning. So we go to restaurants and basically, for the lack of a better word, dumpster dive. They're very good about placing things that we need in a cardboard box. They can't give it to us. They cannot give it to us legally, but they will place things in a cardboard box on top of everything else in their dumpster. The bat signal to us to go pick it up, and we have fresh greens, and we have all kinds of things that we, you know, then turn into food for the masses. But one of the things we did is we started doing kind of like an email forum that goes out to, we have thousands of people on our email list, and basically we'll do, hey, we have Maria who's 40 years old and she needs such and such and such and such. She needs to make her rent for the next 2 months. Here's what that's going to cost. Who's willing to fund that? And then we just get people who like kind of like pick off the weekly list of people that they're willing to help. And it might turn into an ongoing help situation, which it has in several, you know, instances, either supporting them, helping them with their rent to keep them. Because we not only work with the unhoused, we work with the housing people who are about to fall off on the housing insecure. So, you know, we want to stem the tide of people falling onto the streets. So part of our work is also to get people who, so if they have an $800 rent and they can only afford $600 on their salary, then they have basically a, you know, gift person who gives them $200, or 4 people who give $50. And we've really found that that's a great way to kind of break down and manage, you know, funding on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, I think another, in addition to the funding stuff, well, at least one of the other pieces is that people just really don't have the time to give to the effort, the organizing efforts, the raising their families, trying to put food on the table, and that, you know, and that's due directly to the legal, political, and economic structure that we have. I mean, there was a plank from a labor platform in the 1800s around Democracy Day, where, you know, it was a 4-day work week, and on the 5th day you participated in civic affairs, and you sat on committees or boards, or, you know, it was actually a part of your life, that you would be involved in what was going on in the community. And so, I mean, I think that's a major thing that gets in the way of a lot of folks being invested in this. Is the other thing I think that I wanted to bring up was how long-term a lot of this work is. A lot of times folks get involved and they hope or want something to be done very quickly. But if we look not only at the immediate things facing our communities, but also what it's going to take to remedy these things over time, both in the areas where we live, as well as changing the structures or just making those structures obsolete and implementing our own where we live, it's long-term work. And I think it's difficult for people to envision or imagine what that is, because we don't have the time a lot of times, because we're busy taking care of other things that are important to us in a system that wasn't set up to support us. So, I mean, I think that's where mutual aid and other forms of resilience and support, you know, that we've been talking about can come in to help people make the time and space they need to engage in the broader advocacy work. But I think that's a big obstacle that we come up against, is a lot of folks just don't have the space they need or want to be able to participate in a lot of these broader conversations and actions.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I would say just to kind of complement what's being said here is that as far as the funding piece, I think like it's really important to center the work that you're doing rather than the structure that you're using to work to do your work. You know, with the nonprofit structure, there's naturally going to be limitations. And honestly, if we're doing the type of work that we're doing, we should expect to receive less and less funding, right? Because it's disruptive, it's insurgent work, and so like part of it is one, maintaining the focus on why we're doing what we're doing. Because like from our perspective, like this isn't just a project that we're doing. This is our survival, right? You know, Black folks have always been in the margins. You know, and so part of this is you know, as it relates to this being a long-term struggle, like here at Black National Assembly, a lot of us who are in leadership, we're natives here. So when we talk about community we're organized, we're talking about our families, right? We're talking about our loved ones. We're talking about people who we already organically have a close relationship with. So that's not something that we just up and leave or quit. It's something that is critical for our survival. And so part of that already comes with the recognition that you're going to do this work whether you have all the resources you need or not, right? And so I think with that, being that we're engaged in a community building, just because some of our folks need help doesn't mean they're helpless, right? We have been able to do a lot of the work that we're able to do through relationships. Some of our folks have access to big spaces where we can do our mass meetings or our book clubs, or some of our folks have access to spaces where we're able to do our recharges or pass out some of our literature about the work that we're doing. And so it really just comes down to like the relationships that you have with community, which goes into the quality of the organizing. It's more than just, you know, people are more than numbers. It's more than, oh, I can get X amount of people in this space. But it's about how well do you know the people that you're organizing, what relationships that you have. Because those relationships will be a lot more resilient, build that resilience when you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, you're building ground, and the structure responds to by, you know, stripping you of funding or disappearing as far as like the formal structure that you have. So I would definitely emphasize that relationships and really being in deep community with folks that you organize is really critical to building the resiliency in the face of success, honestly. Because if you're doing this and it's not shaking any tables, something is wrong, something is right. And so yeah, just wanted to look at it.
It reminded me of something you said last week, Denzel, when you said what it looks like to build insurgent democracy. I feel like there's a lot of elements that we've been talking about tonight that sort of fit that idea, right? That it's about building greater democracy, and your last statement about effectiveness, you know, it's almost the reaction from the very thing that we're trying to dismantle will be the indicator of our level of success. That's definitely something that we've very much experienced at CELDF, and from both what I'm hearing from both of you, I think that's probably a very common history and experience as well. As to that's when you know you're actually doing the good work. It's unfortunate, but it's a good indicator of, are we pushing the limits in the right way?
Yes.
We're gonna invite people eventually here, if they haven't already, to kind of throw in some comments, make some questions that we'll get to here shortly. I guess in preparation for getting to that point, what else, as we've been sort of talking, or as each of you been thinking about gathering here tonight, did you want to sort of touch upon, sort of expand upon, what else in this sort of realm of, community building and community resistance in the midst of chaos, what else do you think is worthy for us to kind of tackle here tonight?
I think I wanted to mention just something related particularly to the Grant Township situation recently, where it looks like they're going to win, and I don't think they ever thought they were going to. After 10, in terms of getting the harm stopped. We can phrase wins in a lot of different ways, but once we got the news that it looked like this thing was going to be over, it was. I noticed it myself, and I was up in the community as well, and people up there were. It wasn't like there was a. It's almost like we didn't know what to do with a win or with success. We're so used to always being resisting or on the receiving end of something difficult or harmful that we often, I don't think, celebrate success or wins enough as they happen in the day-to-day organizing, whatever that may be. But then keeping that I'll just speak for myself, keeping that spirit alive in ourselves as well, that these are all short-term and long-term struggles, but the relationships built, the organizing, the stuff that's going on is a form of resilience. It's a form of life-giving positive energy into places that need it. Anyways, I was just reminded of that recently, and I am not known for being a positive or rosy attitude person, but that came up for me recently. So I wanted it because I was confused by it. So anyways, I think keeping those things alive is healthy as a part of the organizing as well, and not just getting constantly caught up in what it is that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When we built up the kind of like little township for catching people fleeing from the wildfires, when that representative of the real estate land there showed up, everybody was like, oh, well, we're going to have to start packing up. That's it. We're done for. And when I took him on the little tour, I basically had to tell everybody, listen, don't come at him. Just let him experience this. Talk to him. When I stop at your stall full of kids, books that they can gather as they're fleeing from their house, talk to them about why this is important. Talk to them about the community, in the area, about the businesses surrounding this empty lot that are also, people are stopping by there to get milk, to get juice. Things are happening. When he said that, he called and got on the phone within, he put everybody on speaker. And it was really fun to hear the cheers go up after the owners, the three owners said basically, okay, listen, we can give you a couple more weeks and we're going to donate $10,000 to the cause. And like you said, that was just, I didn't know what to do with it. I was very prepared to have everybody just like pack up and get the hell off of there in 2 hours, or the police were going to show up. So I'm also not known as the person who thinks the best outcome is going to happen. I always hope for it. I don't always present it face-wise. So I get it.
Yeah, I would say, especially on where one of the wins that we're learning to really appreciate is when we start to see people develop a sort of protagonism or sense of leadership within our community, like a collective leadership. So, when we're doing our mass meetings or assemblies, where we're building out our community governance structure, our agenda, it's a win to see people go from, sort of like this passive participant in the current structures that we have, to people who are understanding what it means to center everyday needs, to make that, as a way of building this surge of democracy, right? I think that, it's really neat to see people essentially go from seeing world building and future making as this external thing that happens outside of themselves, and shifting from that to, hey, no, I'm a part of this. Like, I'm a part of a struggle to build an actual democracy, right? And so it's a really beautiful thing to see people not only understand or engage in political struggle, not just as a typical electoral sense, but also recognizing, hey, the decisions that are made every day around me are a matter of political will, and we have the ability to shape that. So whether it's us creating like a people's budget a couple of years ago, the city council fumbling because they were just like, well, because they recognized that people could make their own demands, come up with their own structures, and it resulted in them trying to co-opt a lot of what we're doing, and sort of like scramble. But folks felt a surge of confidence from that because they were like, wow, we can actually shape what we want. And so it's a really exciting feeling when you see the folks that you're organizing, you're working with, see the power of themselves, right, and begin to act on it. So that's just a very promising thing, and I think it's just one of many things as a part of this larger ecosystem as we're building these insurgent democracies, whether it's the mutual aid work, the housing work that's being discussed. It's a really beautiful thing to see people take that power into their own hands.
How well do you think things are happening either in your own communities or more broadly to sort of build that solidarity idea? Lisa, you talked about, being someone that has a certain realm of really just wanting to get rid of, the rotten things, rotten systems, and others are, they're a little more willing to sort of figure out how to work with it still, so there's this range. I think, Chad, you spoke to it as well. There's sort of range of involvement, a range of views. Like, how well are we sort of holding all of those dimensions so that that full collective really sees its value as a collective? And then I guess also within that question, what's your sense of how it can build amongst all the different issues, or how do we connect the issues so we're not siloing issues as it often happens? I mean, everything each of you described, there's so many different facets to it. It's not just, a social thing or civil thing or an economic thing or an environmental thing. Like, all of your work, from what I've heard, it's blending all of that together. And, is that growing? Is it not growing? What is it going to take? I guess, what's either your local, regional, or national perspective on where are we heading here in the sense of this community resilience, as that, helping build that insurgent democracy to get us to kind of that better place? I mean, what's your just general sense or specific sort of response to that?
That's a tough one. I think that working with, the mutual aid concept has always been our biggest strength. And in Portland, we have what we call blocks, and we have them all over. So we have a block for free lunch, where they give out free lunches to kids in school. We have a block for a medic block. We have a block for the BLM movement and Black resistance and aiding them. And all these blocks, because we probably have over 24 of them, kind of come together every once in a while collectively to do a thing, like the thing that we built for people fleeing from the fire. Almost all the blocks were involved and held their own little, court within that, and raised their own funds and did all of that. I think that keeping that kind of thing together, where we're not separate spokes, or we are separate spokes, but then we're all together at a big wheel. And that we just keep rolling with that and keep checking in with each other as, what's happening here? How can I help you with this? Can we lead a bigger resistance to, whatever we're facing, whether it be gentrification or, well, that seems to be the biggest problem everywhere right now, right? With housing and with, food insecurity and, all of that. So, I mean, I'm hopeful within my community that the resistance is going to keep growing in the face, but sometimes it seems like nationally that's, especially being here in Florida now, doing some work with different organizations and seeing the, the mess that is here, makes me very happy to go back to Portland. But then also I realize that in some spaces, it's a very dire situation, and that there isn't a lot of the resistance going on where it could be most effective and most helpful.
Yeah, I'll speak to the South, right? I've noticed that I've been a part of a lot of the resistance liberation work in the South for some years, and we're at a very interesting point where we have different pockets of liberation work that's ongoing. It's taking different forms with each way where like the assembly work that we're doing, something along the spectrums. And I think now we're at a point where we're trying to figure out what it means to build uh, a resilient, for lack of better terms, network that allows us to amplify and like strengthen our work reach. Because I think a lot of us here do a lot of work locally. We understand like the complexities that come with doing that work and building work on a local level, but there's always been this question of what's that look like on a larger, more complex scale. And I think to Lisa's point, like I think part of that starts with recognizing some of the overlapping fronts that we're on. So like, of course, housing in itself has so many dimensions, right? And so finding those moments of opportunity to learn from each other, whatever capacity that may be, or actually building campaign work or initiatives together when it makes sense. Is the thing. And I think right now we're in that phase where we're trying to create infrastructure that will allow us to do this more sustainably. So how do we find ways to learn together throughout the South, right? How can we compare those? Because oftentimes our opposition, they're doing a pretty good job of talking to each other, because whatever happens in Florida is eventually going to happen in Tennessee or Georgia or Alabama.
Right.
And so what does it look like to create that insurgent structure alongside that insurgent democracy that says, okay, how do we intentionally not only learn together, but also coordinate our efforts so that we're not, like leading or ending up with isolated wins that ultimately aren't wins, because if I don't win and folks in other spaces don't win, none of us win. Like our wins have to be connected. And so we're trying to figure out, in the South, how to build that infrastructure, build that larger network so that we can have a more sustainable, stronger liberation front.
Agreed.
Well, I guess I'll go back to my usual sour attitude rather than the celebratory one from a minute ago. But yeah, I've been disappointed in terms of bringing the various issues together that are all symptoms of the economic and legal structure. And I think it's the intent of the system to divide us, keep us in our little silos and our issue areas. And then I think Denzel, you spoke to this a bit. The way the nonprofit structure often obviously works as well, as we then compete for money and influence, and we end up trying to build up whatever victories or wins we have to compete for more money and influence, and lose sight of the values and the reasons that we originally got involved in this work in the first place. And that's even just, I'll say environmental work, but then I think that also is true in a lot of other issue areas, and they're all connected. I think, that's one of the main challenges that we have moving ahead, and that I'm most interested in working on, is how do we continue to keep focus on the structure, both in terms of how it operates on us, so we don't let that continue to divide us and make us be in competition with people who are generally on the same page with most things. And we can find the funding, but we get into these spats and arguments and little issue areas that end up taking so much time and energy away from the larger things. We have seen some, I think, in the organizing I've done, some good overlap, including across issue areas, and political boundaries in rural Pennsylvania, where people have been staying focused on what is important to them. In a lot of cases, it's the water or the air, things like that. They're able to hold a common value set despite disagreeing with people on a lot of other issues that are in those groups. And so I think trying to find that commonality, helping to define what are the things that are operating on us to get us to disagree with each other that are false. They're not real. They're just constructs. And then build that solidarity from the ground up. And so that is, I think, for me, the organizing challenge moving ahead is, and I think, we don't have yet the ability to give people the confidence they need to get away from the structures, whether it's the nonprofit structure or whether it's the, economic or the legal structure, and just stop going to the courts or to the lawyers for help, to just say, we're not going there anymore. And I think that's what needs to be a next phase, at least from where I sit, is continuing to bust the myths around where we live, who we are, and what we're capable of. That confidence, I think, is what's going to be necessary to building something larger. But
yeah, I feel like all of you have spoken to the idea of, by your actions, you're legitimizing that insurgent democracy, and using Denzel's phrase. And it feels like that is a key component to taking on or dismantling basically the illegitimate system. But I think, to your point, Chad, like it's still so pervasive, so large, so ever present, and we're so conditioned by it still. Like, yeah, I guess, what is it going to take? And I think you guys are giving great examples of what it's going to take, but we also know there needs to be greater volume of that kind of resistance resilience work that decouples from the system. Because if we keep feeding it and participating in it, we keep legitimizing it, and therefore we continue to be controlled by it in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's, hopefully there's elements here in what we've talked about tonight that really feed that idea that we can do it. We can build our own new system that isn't needing to be controlled. I think last week we also got a little bit into the conversation in preparation for tonight of just this idea of where power resides, and who holds it and in what form. And I feel like a lot of what each of you have been describing tonight is really potent power. That's really the power that can take on the so-called legitimate types of power that's out there, that of course doesn't come with real consequences when it's wielded. But I think you all have described sort of that real counterforce of power that just needs to grow. And I think that is the problem to be continually figured out.
I agree, including, like Chad was talking about, changing the nonprofit structure. I work a nonprofit very loosely, and then often end up in the DOJ office. But you know what? When I explain what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that a lot of it was self-governed, it had nothing to do with, under what name, it was under a bunch of different, people coming out, and as a community, they really can't find anything wrong with how we're resisting even that part of it. Keep the nonprofit because we can get great funding, through some of that. But how that's used, we've kind of played loosely with, and to Portland's, grace, they've kind of said, okay.
Yeah, and then
We pushed them back a lot in the beginning, and now it's kind of like it's a little more fluid. So I think we are changing even, what nonprofits can do and how they can operate in the field, especially.
Yeah, that just seems so critical. And I was also, when you told the story about sort of the win in relation to setting up a temporary village there to help people in need, but what has been clear in our work here at CELDF is just the tremendous power that privileged property has, right? So you could have one person, in that case 3 people, decide whether this collection of people could physically be in a place,
right?
And talk about deep systemic change that needs to happen. How much power is wielded by privileged property isn't something we've really attacked to the level that we need to, but it's very much the source of a lot of the situations we're in, whether, again, it's environmental, social, economic.
Oh, so much of it, yes.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the most potent
variation of power, form of power is mass power. And, you know, a lot of what we talked about tonight, some of the obstacles that we face are certain constraints that have been put on collective power so that it doesn't unleash itself and shape reality. Part of a lot of work that we're doing is trying to take down those constraints that have been built by this structure that hold back mass power from shaping our current reality. So I just think it's important, you know, that we continue to remind ourselves that our communities and our needs shape our work, not the grants or the grantors or the funders. And I think, you know, as long as we center that, I think we'll be able to develop the adaptability and the resiliency to take the form that we need to take when it's necessary. Right now, you know, many of us are using nonprofit structures. You know, as we continue our work, it may shift to another form, it may shift to something that more resembles something that's rooted in solidarity economy, for example, as we continue to build our work. But I think as long as we're focused on the world building that we're trying to engage in, I think that, you know, some of the obstacles that we would face, even the resiliency of the system that we're currently in, can be overcome. Because at the end of the day, this structure that we currently live in, as advanced and as resilient as it is, it's also self-destructive. It's ultimately self-destructive. People are starving, people are unhoused, people are dealing with climate issues that have been created due to the profit-driven and you know, corporate-centered will. And so it's inevitable that this structure is going to, for lack of better terms, dig its own grave. And so it's important that we do the work that we do, cultivate the masses in such a way that when it's time to really build this work, this world that we want to see, where people's needs are met, people are housed, people are safe, that we're ready to do it.
So are you guys seeing opportunity then in the midst of the chaos, so to speak? I mean, are you seeing maybe some advantages despite the dourness and the direness that can be taken advantage of for good?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that in there. I mean, I think sometimes when you're an organizer or an advocate, activist, the harder the pushback, the more resilience, community resilience you find to push back against those bigger elements, like, you know, the situation of gentrification. So I think that it's the hopefulness lies in actually keeping the community together in its and providing it with resilience, or finding resilience in your community, and knowing that, you know, when times are tough, things can always be a little bit better with community organizing and mutual aid.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Denzel was talking about, you know, the system is self-destructive. Also, the system only exists as long as we believe in it and give it credibility. It's not an immutable law of the universe that humans have to abide by, or nature. And so, you know, I think that's a big part of like the education organizing that, you know, I work with at communities, and I've seen change. Like, it seems like it comes slowly, but there's been big shifts in terms of what I think people understand about the system that I've seen in my organizing over the last 10 or 15 years about whether it's credible or not. Whether the Department of Environmental Protection is there to actually protect the environment. It used to take me 2 or 3 hours of presentations before where people would understand that it was actually a tool of the state that was working on behalf of corporations. People they know that now. They know that corporations have rights under the Constitution that they didn't 10 years ago. So the level of like knowledge and understanding about how the system works, I think, has increased at a rate that I wouldn't have believed 10 years ago, in terms of where people understand themselves within the system, and recognizing that they're less likely to get what they need from it, and that it's fundamentally a problem. I think where the the next phase needs to be is that confidence building and that imagination and that understanding that, okay, now that we know that we have the power and the capability and the tools to do what we need. And I think that's like the next phase. But I think there's been a huge shift over the last 10, 20 years in terms of what people know and understand about themselves in relationship to the system that I wouldn't have anticipated. And so now it's how to harness that knowledge and turn it into energy on the ground.
That's a great point, Chad. I like it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think crises produces consciousness in ways that, though not ideal, I think it's one of those moments where people are forced to look behind the veil. We look at COVID, it peeled back a lot of the layers, the very thin layers of the norm, right? And more, to your point, Chad, more and more people are starting to see that the norm is what got us here. And so I too am very much excited and noticed that just like the shift in consciousness over the past few years. To your point, I think it's about building that confidence and then also like reorienting people around their skills, right? So there's a lot of people that are very much so capable of beginning this, and I keep referring to world building, but they're capable of doing that. It's just a matter of getting them to your point about imagination, to reorient how they understand their skills. So, if it's, you have someone who's hypothetically a welder or somebody who's able of in the business of building homes, instead of them feeling like, oh, what can I do? It's like, no, like you can build a home, regardless of what bureaucratic structure you have to go through, whatever corporate entity, you can actually build a home. So what happens when you reorient your skills in a way to where we're actually directly building people's needs or addressing people's needs, specifically around homelessness, instead of being profit driven, right? So like, yeah, to your point, or in complement of building confidence, it's also getting people to understand that the things that they do have right now can directly contribute to the structure and the world that we're trying to build. So.
Well, we're getting close to our stopping time. Are there any kind of sort of additional thoughts, ideas, things you want to sort of drop in the room before we sign off tonight? I feel like we covered a lot of ground, but just want to make sure there are other things that we want to get to tonight before we sign off.
I just want to extend a big welcome or thank you for everything, and welcome to people who are listening, and maybe kind of we are galvanizing them to find actionable items in their own community that they can, latch on to. But thank you to Chad and Denzel for all the work you're doing in this space. So important.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Denzel and Lisa. I think it's been a great discussion and something to build on, frankly, that I'm excited about. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank y'all. Thank y'all, Chad, Lisa. All right, this has been an amazing discussion. I hope folks are able to listen to some of the things that we offer tonight and be encouraged to get into larger work, join an organization, build community with your folks, and contribute to the construction of an insurgent democracy, because reality is we do not live in a democracy right now. And I think that we are more than capable of building one that centers people's needs, that allows people to live long, healthy lives. So.
That's perfect, Denzel. And just to kind of echo what you were describing, the sense of your view of the South and bringing together sort of the resources and experience and capabilities and energy. And that's the very thing I think that we at CELDF are also looking to try to do, so that it becomes easier at least to find those things. We all know that it's going to take people in the places where they're at to make it happen, but having resources like the two of you available, or having those stories, or having those ideas, or having that inspiration, we all know I think is a big component. And so we're we're trying to do our best to sort of gather that and connect it back to the ground, so that we can grow the very things I think that each of you sort of laid out as, moving beyond just sort of the resistance and sort of survival piece, and really getting at living in the way that we should be able to. That isn't the case today. So this has been fantastic. To Chad's point, I'm hoping that we'll get another opportunity to have a conversation either in this format or otherwise with the two of you. And thanks everyone for being here tonight to be part of this. We're hoping to bring more and more of these kinds of events forward and in some different aspects. Also to hopefully be an aid for those of you out there on ideas and possibilities. And I'm hoping that if we get inquiries, Denzel and Lisa, about more of your guys' work specifically, if you're okay with us connecting people to you. If so,
Absolutely.
we'll make sure to pass along your contact information. So
Yeah.
thank you again,
Always.
everyone, for being here, and have a great evening.